Hello, Namaskar from India, Tashidirek, and good morning to our friends in the States. Good afternoon at in Europe, and late good evening to our friends in Taiwan, in Australia, in Japan. So today we are going to discuss a very interesting subject, that is human rights and Tibetan women under the Chinese colonial rule. This is a series of webinars we have been running since 2021, last year, April. And this is going to be our 16th webinar on various aspects of Tibet and China. And today we are going to discuss women's human rights of Tibet. As in the beginning, I will give a very short introduction of the organizers and the participants. And then we will start with our participants. And after that, we will have a question answer session. So to start with, I am Vijay Kranti, and I represent Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement, which is a meeting point, a think tank of thinkers, of researchers, of public opinion makers, and those who have interest in the Himalayan Asia region and who want to exchange views. And then we have Tibetan Youth Congress, which is the largest and the most prominent organization of Tibetan diaspora. And right from the day when Tibetans came to exile, very soon after that, Tibetan Youth Congress was formed. And since then, over more than 50 years, this TYC has practically functioned as a nursery of developing talent, of the political talent, social awareness talent, cultural awareness among Tibetans, social awareness among Tibetan people. And today, we can say that Tibetan Youth Congress is one of those nurseries which has nurtured so much talent that practically all the prime ministers of Tibet, all the Sikyong, or now we call Sikyong, which is equivalent to the president of Tibet, and members of parliament, people from judiciary, researchers, they have all grown through Tibetan Youth Congress. So this is about organizers. And today we have three very prominent speakers, experts on the subject, who represent various fields and various who specializes in various aspects of the subject, so that at the end we can expect that we get a practically a very wide understanding, a wide perspective of various aspects of issues related to Tibetan Youth Congress. And our first speaker today will be Marco Respinti, whom many of our audience are already familiar with. He is director in charge of Bitter Winter, which is a magazine from Milano, Italy. This magazine is very special one. It's a daily news magazine, and it deals with religious liberty and human rights in China especially. And it is published in so many languages, which include English, Chinese, Italian, French, German, Spanish, Japanese, and Korean. So Marco has a very wide experience. He's a professional journalist. He's an independent researcher. He is an essayist. He is a translator. He is a lecturer and an editorial consultant. So since 1996, he has been senior fellow at the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal. And also he has been founding member and board member of the Vandenberg Society Center for European Renewal from Hague, the Netherlands. So welcome, Marco, once again to our show. And then we have Professor Mylin Pen. Professor Pen is a prominent scholar academician from Taiwan. She is the chairperson and professor at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the National Yang Ming Chiao Tung University uh, in Hsinchu, Taiwan. And her areas of research are on the economic sociology and development sociology, especially on the survival strategies of migrants and refugees. And she has been very close touch and closely associated with the Tibetan refugee community. She has been visiting India, Nepal, and has been very close touch with the Tibetans living in Taiwan. And she has been studying their social situations, political situations, cultural challenges, etc., quite keenly. And she has produced a chain of very learned articles and papers, which I'm sure we will be available to you, and on especially on Tibet. Then we have Tenzin Pasang. She is a young Tibetan woman activist who is passionate about youth empowerment and human rights of Tibetan people. Currently, she is holding a very active and prominent position as program director at the Students for a Free Tibet in India. And as many of us know, that Students for a Free Tibet is a very uh, an activist organization which is working with university students in India and across the world in so many universities. And they are interface with the outer world, Tibet's interface with the outer world, with the outer younger world. And those people, those young people who in a couple of years or around next few years, who are going to join the workforce around the world, this organization interacts with those young people. And I'm sure we will have a very interesting perspective to know about Tibetan women, their human rights in those Tibetans who are living in under the Chinese colonial rule and also in exile. So welcome Tenzin Pasang to this group. We are expecting Professor Ayushi Ketkar. She is a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Oh, she is welcome, Ayushi. She has been missing some of our webinars, recent ones, because of some health issues. And I'm very happy to share this information with you that she has recovered quite substantially. And today she will be with us and she will be handling question answer session. She is an expert in international affairs and security matters. So welcome, Ayushi. And we all wish you very good health. And then we have Mr. Sonam Tsering. Sonam Tsering is General Secretary of Tibetan Youth Congress. As I
Yes, sir.
said,
Thank you.
the most dynamic organization of Tibetan diaspora. So welcome Sonam Tsering as General Secretary of TYC. He is the co-host of this show, and he will be giving vote of thanks and his own remarks when we conclude. And now I think it is time to start. So our issue is Tibetan women, their human rights under the Chinese colonial rule. As we are aware that the Chinese government, since China occupied Tibet in 1951, has been running an agenda of not only colonizing Tibet and occupying Tibet and usurping its resources, natural resources, and its geography and all other interests, but unfortunately, the Chinese government has running a communist agenda, which is focused at wiping out the identity of Tibetan people, as it has happened. If I say it in short, China today boasts that it's made of 56 nationalities. They call them 56 sisters. And Hans are the real big sister. And if we go by the government statistics released by the Chinese government itself, all the 55 nationalities of what they claim sisters of China today account for less than 8%, which is very unfortunate. And it is telling. So the Han Chinese under the communist rule today occupy more than 92% of population. It has happened because of cultural genocide, if I can say a single word, of all other cultures. And today we see that those cultures which are at now at in danger are Tibetan culture, the Uyghurs, East Turkestan's Uyghur culture, and the South Mongolians. So today, because we are going to discuss a part of it about the woman, so may I request Marco Respinti to please present your perspective on this subject. Marco Respinti, please.
Of course, Vijay, thank you so much for inviting me to discuss this very, very important topic of our days and so often neglected. Uh, since I am the one who's in speaking first, I will kind of um, introduce the topic also. And of course, I will touch upon a few things that you just raised because they are important points. And I'm looking at the titles of our webinar today. I will reverse the order and start with the second part and then go to the first for the sake of to benefit our audience, but also for the sake of truth. I would like to address briefly what it does mean to live under Chinese colonial rule in Tibet. Because communist China, let us not forget, it is militarily occupying Tibet since 1959. From that year, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, regarded as the father of the Tibetan people, is compelled to live in exile in Dharamshala, India. Dharamshala is also the home of the Central Tibetan Authority, or the Tibetan government in exile. The Chinese Communist Party led regime, which has been occupying Tibet for 63 years, has dismembered historical Tibet to dilute its identity. Parts of the historical Tibetan regions of Amdo and Kham have been incorporated into several Chinese provinces. Forgive my bad Chinese pronunciation: Qinghai, Gansu, Sichuan, and Yunnan. Roughly two-thirds of historical Tibet are no longer called Tibet. The remaining third is a Chinese territory that goes under the ironic name of Tibet Autonomous Region, but is not autonomous at all. Repression and persecution are the daily bread of the Tibetans. The Tibetan language is de facto almost outlawed. The Tibetan culture is adulterated by major injections of Marxism, the official secular religion of the CCP, which is based on atheism. To reincarnate, Tibetan Buddhist lamas need the official permission of the atheistic Chinese state. The Panchen Lama, kidnapped by the CCP in 1996 at the age of 6, was at that time the youngest political prisoner in the world and is still missing. Monasteries are closed, or transformed in touristic resorts. And according to Dr. Adrian Zenz, senior fellow and director of China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation in Washington, D.C., Tibet may now host facilities that are similar to the dreaded transformation through education camps in Xinjiang, called by its non-Han inhabitants East Turkestan, which Zenz has been studying closely for years. Well, there is only one name for the CCP policies in Tibet: genocide. Genocide is a new word created decades ago to define a crime that was at that time perceived as new. genocide is a neologism created in 1948 by 44, by Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin to confront retrospectively the peculiar nature of the massacre of Armenians in 1915 and 16, and to give a legal classification to the Holocaust of Jews perpetrated by Nazi Germany. In international law, genocide is the intentional destruction of a distinctive human group, identified by ethnic, national, racial, or religious characteristics. The definition should be understood correctly. We usually think of a genocide as having a large number of victims and being executed in a relatively short amount of time. It is often so, but not always. The defining features of a genocide are not the high number of victims and its traumatic sudden implementation per se. A genocide is a genocide because of the intention and aims of its perpetrators. It is a genocide when the perpetrators try to completely wipe out an entire human group, identified by, again, ethnic, national, racial, or religious characteristics. For several reasons, perpetrators may be not able to accomplish this task or accomplish it only partially, luckily. The number of people they manage to kill may be limited, luckily. But if their intention and aim are to eradicate an entire human group through a complete ethnic or religious cleansing, be it by killing most of its members or compel them to leave a territory, that is legally a genocide. Bitter Winter, the magazine I'm honored to be the director in charge of, has been among the first media outlet to review an important scholarly discussion about the definition of genocide. We sadly know that the cry launched after the Jewish Holocaust, "Never again," did not eliminate genocides. After World War II, other genocides were carried out due to a number of reasons, among which the availability of direct live news thanks to new technologies and a growing international conscience of human rights. Post-World War II genocides have been somewhat different. While there are still examples of international massacre of a high number of victims in a comparatively short time, the new genocides are often accomplished through the annihilation of identity. We are all too familiar with the neologism cancel culture. Modern genocides are the cancellation of the entire culture of a religious group, a people, or a nation with the aim of eradicating their distinctiveness, performed on a systematic scale and supported by massive campaigns of disinformation and hate speech. They happen at a slower pace compared to the traumatic quickness of previous genocides. They are also somewhat less visible, which suits the perpetrators, but they are still genocides. When a government such as the Chinese Communist regime targets a human group recognizable for its cultural, linguistic, religious, and ethnic identities, such as the Tibetans, to completely assimilate it, cancel its distinctiveness, cynicize its beliefs, customs, and language, and twist its religion, this is a case of religious and ethnic cleansing and the genocide, even if there are no piles of corpses to be seen at the corners of the streets. In fact, if that drive is not stopped in time, there will be no Tibetans, and an entire human genus, the Latin word from which the neologism genocides comes, will disappear. This consideration, going directly to the second part of our title, bring us right into the middle of our topic, which is the first part of the title of our webinar, Tibetan Women Living in These Conditions. This somewhat slower and somewhat less visible genocide, sometimes called cultural genocide, is performed through generations and needs to target first the generative capacity of the people to be eliminated. That is to say, women, Tibetan women in our case. Of course, no one thinks that women represent only the generative capacity of a nation. Tibetan women are not mothers only, but it is obvious that women are at the center of the generative human capacity. From my understanding of Tibetan society, and I'm not Tibetan, I'm not a scholar, I'm not an expert per se of Tibet or Tibetan culture, women's association with motherhood is a strong part of its culture. In Tibetan Buddhism and in Tibetan Buddhist spirituality, women mothers are fundamental to cultivate compassion, which is necessary to advance on the path to enlightenment. Tibetan Buddhists learn from a mother's love for her children to love all creatures, not only human beings, existing in the world. Thus, women bring love in Tibetan society in a very concrete way. Of course, men too play an unavoidable role in the generative capacity of a society, but women's role is greater. It is, in fact, not only about the generative capacity per se, it is also about the care and the custody of new lives after conception and birth. To give a future to a society and affirm a love for life, it is not enough to generate. Once new human beings are generated, they need to be nurtured, educated, trained to become active members of a society. This is the peculiar role of women, although men as fathers also participate in it and provide general support for the family. Two common words show this: matrimony and patrimony. They are now part of the English language, but they are totally Latin in their roots. They mean, respectively, the gift from the mother and the gift from the father. The recipients of these gifts are, of course, the children. And here the basic idea was that in a family, the mother is the one that gives life, while the father provides the concrete means of living. It is then not surprising that cultural genocides target women. It is not surprising that the cultural genocide through which the CCP is trying to cancel Tibetans, distorting and misrepresenting their religion, language, customs, and tradition, targets women first. Let me underline two features that make this all too real, as we often covered in Bitter Winter. One is the CCP family planning policy. We all know that the one-child policy forcibly implemented from 1979 to 2015 to try to cope with the economic disaster caused by Chinese communist collectivism is in a foolish and bloody way, killed or prevented from being born millions of Chinese babies by the order of the state. We all know that that policy changed to 2 children in 2015 and to 3 children on May 31, 2021. But this does not affect non-Han people in autonomous regions such as Xinjiang, East Turkestan, and Tibet. While Chinese propaganda claims that Tibetan women are treated more leniently, in fact, they are still the target of an aggressive state family planning accomplished through sterilization and other methods, whose aim is precisely to eradicate Tibetan identity. The second is the mass rape policy that subjugated Tibetan women in the so-called transformation through education camps in Tibet. This practice is also common in the camps of Xinjiang, East Turkestan, but we know that many of the CCP policies for Xinjiang, East Turkestan have been tested and tried before in Tibet, and mass rape of women is no exception. These horrors twins with that of population control. It is in fact a form of humiliation that deeply affects women in their deepest identity. Again, women are not only mothers, but mothers can only be women. Persecutors know this and all its deep psychological implication all too well. An easy way to win a nation is by destroying the love for life in its members, raping women, and violating their natural sense of motherhood in a way that demoralizes their love for life and their desire to give birth, or physically preventing them from becoming mothers in the future, is a powerful weapon in the hands of tyrants. It is the common dehumanizing policy that all totalitarian states promote. The CCP in Tibet is no exception. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. As always, we all were expecting this. The way you connect the basic facts and situations with the theories behind human behavior, and especially the behavior of the tyrant state, as you gave examples of what happened to in the Second World War, and now what is happening to the people, especially the women in Tibet and East Turkestan. And yeah, I must be thankful, for giving such a philosophic as well as a, a, a sociological and political analysis of the current situation. Thank you very much. So now may I request our friend Tenzin Pasang, who will be presenting her perspective as a Tibetan woman, as a Tibetan youth, and as an activist who has been in close touch with the information which comes out from occupied Tibet. Although the information it's very difficult to reach, but still a lot of information finds its way, maybe very late, but still there are people who are very keenly observing this information, and Tenzin Pasang is surely one of them. So I will request Tenzin Pasang to please present your perspective.
Hello, thank you, Vijiji, for this warm introduction. And yeah, uh, situations in today's Tibet is devastating, be it social, cultural, or like political. Since the Chinese forceful occupation of Tibet, right? And Marco has briefly introduced about the human rights situation inside Tibet. But however, um during all these years, Tibetan resistance movement has been alive, and Tibetan women too have and are still prominent, playing a prominent role in the struggle for Tibetan independence. So, going with the topic and to highlight the understand how Tibetan women are coping with the human rights denial inside Tibet, I would like to start with a brief chronological kind of account of the series of major events that happened, and the movements that was initiated by Tibetan women who sacrificed their life. And I think these stories will testify to the human rights situations inside Tibet. So after 10 March 1959 national uprising, on 12 March 1959, it was such a critical situation that the Tibetan women rose to defend the sovereignty of country. And that time, the movement was led by this group of courageous women. For example, like Pamoku Sangla, Sonam Dechen Ani Yundela, and many more who first formed this association called National Association of Women. And then from 12th to 18th March, so many different type of the protest was taken out on by Tibetan women on the street of Lhasa. And by the 18th March, the about almost 5,000 women has gathered at the Debulinga, and then Chinese authority, of course, arrested many of those women, dragged from their home, and they were brutally tortured and subjected to merciless interrogation. And Pang Pusang, for an example, who was leader of such demonstrations, was imprisoned and tortured. And then she herself was crippled. She lost her leg, one leg, and she also lost her hair because might people have probably been pulled out by the wood when she was being tortured during interrogation. And we commemorate 12 March as a Women Uprising Day, right? And then coming down on 1969, when the Cultural Revolution was in progress, another demonstrations by women were carried out under the leadership of this nun called Chile Chudrila from the Nyemuru Nanui in the native town called Nyemo. And this uprising was again viciously crushed, and she and 60 other women were subjected to severe flogging in the various mass accusation trial. And later on, all the 60 women and their leaders were paraded around the Lhasa Palgod, which is in the central Lhasa, and they were publicly executed in the contradiction to international law. And then coming down in September 1987, when this large independence demonstration erupted in Tibet, again, hundreds of Tibetan women, particularly nuns, have sacrificed their life for the Tibetan struggle. In 1992, 47 nuns of Garinani were arrested, and Ngawang Sangdrela is one of such nun. I met her just last Sunday when we and International Tibet Network organized this talk by the former political prisoner. We invited Ngawang Sangdrela and Golok Jingmela, and they talked about they shared their experience. Such a courageous and inspiring woman. She, at such a young age of 10, participated in the independence demonstrations and detained for 15 days. And then, age 13, she participated in again another peaceful demonstrations, and then was detained for 9 months without any charges. And then, age 15 in 1992, she was arrested for staging a independent demonstration in Lhasa with these other 47 nuns of the Gari Nanui, as I mentioned earlier. And she was sentenced for 2-year imprisonment, which was then spiked up with a combined of 23 years of imprisonment because of several sentence extension even inside prison, because she was often first to take the lead when there was demonstration even inside Tibet. She never lost her courage. And also, with the increasing indoctrination and surveillance of Tibetan Buddhism, women and nuns have been suffering under the Sinicization agenda of Chinese state. For example, Thalungal and Yarjangal are these two most prominent Buddhist academy located in Kham province of Tibet, and the establishment of these two institutions is considered as a landmark of the revival of Tibetan Buddhism after the massive damage caused during the Cultural Revolution. And the monumental change in this institution is initiation of the conferment of Khemo degree on the Tibetan nun in 1990s. This degree is equivalent to PhD degree, and since this Khemo degree is a great feat in the history of Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhist community, and with this great reputation of this institution, many of Tibetan Buddhists, many of Tibetan nuns from the various part of Tibetan regions has joined the institution. However, there have been waves of evictions of nuns, demolitions of nuns quarter at Halungar and Yajingal in 2009 under Xi Jinping's administration. The evicted nuns were held by the Chinese state and not allowed to go back to their academy to study, and have been subjected to political re-education by the Chinese state. And then devastating news. The demolition of Halungar began in 2016, and in 2019, Yachingal also met the same fate of demolitions and evictions. So, and also, I like to mention that one of the recent policy in Tibet is the so-called the four standard. This implementation of this policy was carried out in the Shuksep nunneries in October 2019, and the state implement this religious policy by conferring the award on the monks and nuns who are regarded as a model monks and nuns, and we also call it the Buddhism with the Chinese character, right? And then in July 2021, the local official of the Gansu province was forcibly removed. They removed the monks and nuns and forced them to forsake their monastic life, disrobed them in order to close down the Tibetan monastery called Karma, which also means red fort. And we have seen, even I have seen the videos which was widely circulated in the Facebook and other social media sites, very sad, where nuns were seen praying, crying while holding a sit-in protest in front of the monasteries. Hence, when they are trying to show that these state-enforced colonial discourse on empowered Tibetan women, but in contrary, this is equivalent of depriving Tibetan nuns of their cultural and religious roots, of whom where Buddhist ethics and value have been the source of empowerment for the many centuries. And turning Tibetan Buddhist location in space of Chinese domination is step toward the nuns' disempowerment, right? And today, as Marco mentioned, China is still pursuing this one-point policy of obliterating Tibetan identity from all fronts, where the force mass sterilizations and abortions to restrict the growth of Tibetan populations, transfer of massive Chinese settler into the Tibet, as to dissolve the Tibetan people in the sea of Chinese settler. And PRC's family planning policy in Tibet is unnecessarily very intrusive, medically unsound, and violent. They are regulating the timing of childbirth, limiting the number of Tibetan children permitted to be born, and they enforce these limits through different means, officially since 1992, where they force women to undergo abortion and sterilization operation against their will through severe economic and social sanctions for having child called out of plan, where their sanction includes imposing fine, often exceeding families' entire yearly income, denying the out of plan child the paper which required them to go to school or like receive medical care. So when I say forced, it was intended, and because the forced abortion sterilizations are the procedure which was undergone without prior consent of the woman. So similarly, it was also forced when women consent under threat. For example, when women husbands were held imprisoned until women agreed to go to undergo the surgery, or when women were consented to the procedure in fear only after officials have to come to their house to escort them to the hospital. And will, because the will choice was absent here. And then these example that I've mentioned, it doesn't come out of air. These were these example of the testimony in real life. And there are numerous reports which documented that Tibetan women are subjected to abortion without their knowledge, where women were encouraged to go to clinic for a checkup for a medical purpose, which is unrelated to their pregnancy, and then given an injection to induce abortion without being told the purpose of injection. And then abortions were followed by sterilization operation without consent, uh, informed consent. So I believe these policies are specifically designed for Tibetans and are different from the policy the PRC are implementing for the Chinese people. Because under such family planning restrictions, the size of Tibetan population will continue to decrease to one or two or even three children per family is not enough to maintain the size of Tibetan population. Because Chinese policy is virtually eliminating the traditional kinship relation, because for family permitted to have only one child, there can be no brother, no sister, no aunt, uncle, or cousins, no kinship relationship, right? And they are also reducing the size of already small Tibetan population by continuing to transfer the Chinese settler into Tibet. And they have recently embarked on the policy of encouraging Tibetan women to marry Chinese through various incentives, where this policy is very discriminatory because it denies Tibetan who marry fellow Tibetan the same kind of advantage which was offered to the one who marries Chinese, right? And it is deeply disturbing because they are utilizing the marriage as a political tool and means for diluting Tibetan nationality and culture. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that the Chinese, the PRC's conduct in Tibet point to the systematic pattern of reducing Tibetan population, eliminating Tibetan culture, religion, and relegating Tibetan to minority in our own country. And as Marco has elaborated on what the genocide is, and I think these things that I've mentioned are sufficient proof that violate the genocide conventions, which was rectified by the PRC, right? And to Tibetan women who have suffered the loss of their national identity, murder of their man, loss of their unborn child, have themselves been abused, been raped, harassed, been humiliated, and yet the struggle for independence will go on. Still, the justice is done to them. And with this in my mind, remembering the sacrifice that so many Tibetan women, those we know, those we talked about today, and thousands that can't be identified, have made. And I think we must and we can all pledge to do justice for Tibet. Thank you. Pyogello.
Ah, thank you, Tenzin Pasang, for such a passionate and matter of fact presentation of the Tibetan women's case, and especially the way you have traced it chronologically.
Mhm.
How these two things are very interesting. Number one, the cultural genocide, the oppression is non-stop going on since day one, and
Yes.
at the same time, the determination of Tibetan women is still it is maintained and rather growing, and they are becoming more aware of their situation and resisting. So this second part, that in spite of all the efforts of the Communist Party of China and the oppressive apparatus of the People's Republic of China, the Tibetan women are today they have not lost their determination. That is, I think, one of the best takeaway points people like me would take from your presentation. So thank you very much for uh, being so, giving so many details and so many facts about it. Thank you very much. And now we are coming to our very special speaker. I call her special for the reason number one, that Professor Pan is with us first time in this series, which has been going on for 1 year, since April 2021. And she is from Taiwan. As I said, that she is a professor uh, in Yangming Chiao Tung University in Hsinchu, Taiwan. And she's a economic sociologist, developmental sociologist. So I'm sure she's going to make present another perspective, which makes the picture complete about Tibetan women. So, Professor Pan, welcome.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thanks for giving me this opportunity to participate in this discussion. Today's presentation is based on my own personal experience by conducting research over many years in the Tibetan exile community in India. I have been doing research on exile Tibetans' survival strategy in India for more than 15 years. And especially, I'm studying the sweater selling business, which is the major income generating activity for exile Tibetans in India for the past 40 years. And my major concern is how can Tibetans as refugees find niches and build up their competitiveness with Indian local people. And based on the observation on women's situation from the perspective of exile community, I will provide a contrast to today's theme, that is the situation of women in Tibet. And my presentation will have three parts. The first part is exile for being a woman or care about the women's well-being. I want to provide two cases that relates to China's policy on forced abortions and sterilization of Tibetan women. The China's family planning policies and practice are targeted exclusively toward women. The burden of the Chinese government's effort to limit or reduce the population is solely loaded upon women. They have to go through the heavy penalties. Birth control pills and abortions are coercive. but no birth control measure like condoms are available for men. Therefore, forced abortion and sterilization become the reason of exile, and this is the reason only for women, not for men. Several years ago, I met a middle-aged Tibetan woman who ran a small stand selling CDs in Dharamsala. I can see she is quite a newcomer because she can speak Chinese with me and just try to settle in India, given her small shop's condition. She told me that she used to be a farmer in Tibet. She has married and already has one girl child. Then she found out that she is having a second baby and she and her husband wanted to keep the baby. However, she knows that it is impossible. Under the Chinese policy, she will either lose her child or face the huge penalty that her family could not afford. The only way to keep the baby safely is to get out of the control of Chinese government. So she decided to come to India with her husband and the child with the hope to keep the baby. By the time I met her, she just came to India for 3 years and is still struggling to survive as a new refugee in India. Her husband is a helper in a restaurant and she is selling CDs on the street. Another story is that I met a doctor in the Tibetan settlement in South India many years ago. She works as a doctor specialized on women's tumors in a hospital in Tibet and serves as the director of the department. In addition to see patients, perform surgeries, and conduct researches, she also has to carry out health education and provide free clinical services in Tibet's remote areas. During her visits on many places in Tibet, many times, she had the first-hand experience on what happened to Tibetan women under China's family planning policy and the discrimination on Tibetan in general situation. She found out that many Tibetan women are being sterilized without being informed or forced abortion regardless the health of the mother's condition. A significant number of women become seriously ill or died after being hospitalized. She was totally shocked by what she saw at that time and began to make documents on what has happened to Tibetan women. By the time she wrote hundreds of pages of reports about how to improve the status of Tibetans, especially the well-being of women, and even naively wanted to print it into a book and published it. However, she is regarded by the Chinese Communist Party authorities as a separatist, with the intention undermining the unity of the country. As an important director of the department of the hospital at that time, she was also a highly respected surgeon with outstanding medical skills. Just because she had the courage to speak out for Tibetan women, based on her medical profession and her identity as a Tibetan, she became a criminal who betrayed the country overnight. She became the target of the Chinese Communist Party, so she had no choice but flee Tibet with her husband and come to India. When I met her, she is one of the doctors of the hospitals in Tibetan settlement in South India. However, due to equipment of the hospital, she can only give prescriptions to patients. Her expertise on surgery has become rusty because she did not have the opportunity to perform it since she came to India. The first case is the story of victims of one-child policy. The second case is the witness of the suffering of Tibetan women. It is a story of courageous Tibetan doctors who stand up for truth but being denied by the Chinese Communist Party. No matter what kind of social position, either a former or the elites, they face the same Chinese Communist Party and being denied their human rights. So, according to these two cases, how Tibetan women are coping with human rights denied inside China-ruled Tibet. Apparently, one of the choices is to escape from the control of Chinese government. Therefore, today's discussion, the major theme is about inside the China-ruled Tibet. I will suggest that exile society should be seen as an integral part and play an important role on the coping strategy. So, why do Tibetans leave their hometown to reside in India? Just because they want to have rights to expression, they can practice their language and preserve their culture and religion. Their reproductive rights are not being interfered, and they found a safe environment for women and children. Also, they still want Tibet to get free and want to return back to their homeland. So following this perspective, I think the Tibetan Women's Association should be mentioned. As Pasang just mentioned before, in year 1959, March the 10th, the National Uprising Day, and during that period, the Tibetan women across the sections to organize a demonstration, even including nuns in the leadership groups. They even was the spark that for the Tibetan women's movement for independence. So, so by the time actually they have 5-point statement, something like Chinese should go back to China, Tibetans are the rightful owners of Tibet, and so China has no rights whatsoever inside Tibet, etc. So the Tibetan women will continue with their struggle until the Chinese stops interfere in Tibetans' affairs. So in 1984, September the 10th, the TWA is formally formed in Dharamsala with the support of Dalai Lama. And if you look at the goals of the TWA, actually is both for the women inside and outside Tibet. For inside Tibet, TWA's main objective is to raise public awareness of the abuse faced by Tibetan women in Chinese occupied today. It's the same mission, it's the same thing what we are doing today. It's also their goal. And through extensive publicity and involvement in national and international affairs, TWA's communicates to the gender-specific human rights abuse committees against the Tibetan women in the form of forced control policy and also restrictions on religious, political, and social and cultural freedoms. So many things is related to about the situation of the Tibetan women inside the Tibet. But in addition to this, they also have the goal for the exile Tibetan community for the Tibet to ensure the Tibetan women to have access to the adequate education information about the healthcare, childcare, and the family planning, etc. So the TWA is the institutional level to promote women's welfare in exile community. Not only fight for Tibetan cause, but also provide the traditional welfare service. Even more important is to promote gender equality and the empowerment of women. And also another thing another thing I want to mention is TWA is also the publisher of Doma magazine. And when you look at the content of the magazine, actually, it's very, they also provide a very cutting edge knowledge about the knowledge about gender equalities and the empowerment of women. So I think the importance of the Tibetan Women Association in the institutional level should be acknowledged. And I think that is very, very meaningful for the women to struggle for the Chinese policy to have to violate the human rights of Tibetan women inside Tibet. So then the third part I want to mention is the woman's role on resilience of exile community. I have been studying the sweater selling business for many years in India, in the Tibetan community. When I first visited Tibetan community in India, I learned about the Tibetan refugees selling sweater during winter season in different Indian cities. It draws my attention to understand the survival strategy of exiled Tibetan in India. So by the time actually I was visiting Tibetan settlement in South India, and thought that the sweater selling business is just a subsidiary economic activity to increase additional income. And while the major income came from agricultural or handicrafts. But when I start to conduct research on various Tibetan settlements to explore the issue, I realized that the role of the sweater selling business is even more crucial. Surprisingly, the role of the sweater business hasn't been recognized or documented by Tibetan government in exile at that time. So in order to understand the importance of the income in sweater selling, then I have conducted a questionnaire in the Tibetan settlement. Then I found out the business is even important for the Tibetans in North region. And because in South India, Tibetans can have agricultural incomes, but for the North, many Tibetans can only to sell sweater to have the cash. And then I found out in this business, women plays a very important part in this business. And I have been visit many Tibetan sweater market in different Indian cities through the years. And people told me that women are doing better than men in this business. And all the customers likes to go to women rather than men. So the gender division of labor in this sweater selling business is women take charge the major part of the business, and then making profits for the business and support the family. So so when I visit a different sweater market, I also met many women and even highly educated women. They also need to help their parents doing the business there. I met one teacher. She told me since she was 18, she has been selling sweater during winter times. And by the time I met her, she's already 40. And she told me she might have needs to do this business continue in the future. So what I want to say is, even for the exile community, the major economic activities, women play a very important role in this kind of activities. So in conclusion to my presentation, I have 3 points to make. Is first, exile community should be an integral part of coping strategy for women to fight for China's policy on Tibetan women inside Tibet. Second, the importance of TWA is an institutional level of non-governmental organization to, to promote the awareness of women's situation both inside and outside Tibet. It does not only strive for Tibetan's cause, but also gender equality and women's empowerment. That's the positive and the sustainable way to enhance women's well-being and a big contrast of women's situation to inside Tibet. The third, sweater selling business has been play an important role for Tibetans' survival strategy in India. While women are key to the success of the business. And while the Chinese policy on Tibetanizing, the resilience of exile community provides a hope for people inside Tibet. So that is my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pan. The way you have given a very interesting, added a new perspective to this whole issue, that your experience with those Tibetan women, especially the two cases you presented, both who are in exile, and people may ignore their experience to understand the situation inside Tibet. But you have very rightly picked up those two examples. One is the woman who is selling CDs in the market in India to run her family. And the reason behind her coming to exile is that she wanted to keep her second child, to give birth to her second child, who that baby was threatened by the Chinese policies, and she was afraid that if she stayed back in Tibet, she will lose that uh, baby before it is born. So that explains the severity of the situation the Tibetan women are facing because of forced abortions, forced sterilizations, and the treatment they receive at the hands of the Chinese authorities. And your second example again also presence of that doctor who was a trained surgeon in Tibet and had to run away from there because she was also being treated the same way as very, very ordinary Tibetan women were being treated in the street. So these two examples, plus your study of Tibetan women's role in upkeeping their family, the financial role they are playing, this adds a very interesting aspect to the whole issue which we have been discussing today. So thank you very much for adding, making this very meaningful contribution. I'm sure in future we will have you again in our forthcoming similar discussions. So thank you. And now that our three main presentations are over, we'll have a very quick session of question and answers. We have Professor Ayushi Ketkar with us, who is a professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University, and she is a very active member of CHASE. She handles question and answer sessions in these webinars. So I'm sure she has a few very crisp questions so that our three experts can make more additions to what they have said earlier. So Professor Ayushi Ketkar, please.
Thank you, sir. And after that wonderful lectures and summing up by Vijay sir, I have time for just three crisp questions, as rightly said by Vijay sir. First, Marco sir, for you, you have mentioned a very important point, that is the disinformation campaign. And this is a very important part of psychological warfare. And when it comes to human rights and especially rights of women, uh, in India, we call it a double disadvantage. First, the fact that you're a woman, and secondly, you belong to a category which is already being persecuted. So you face a double disadvantage. And as you rightly said, the generative capacity of women or their reproductive power is misused most of the time. So the question to you is, what exactly can we as individuals, as people supporting Tibet, do to end this disinformation campaign? Because this seems to be a very never ending problem, especially with China's deep pockets and with its technological prowess. It seems to be spreading everything in its advantage. And the plight of Tibetan people, population, especially women, is either unknown to the world, or secondly, even if it's known, there's nothing much that the world seems to be doing. So for you, the question is, how can we end this, or how can we contribute to ending this disinformation campaign? Tenzingla, as a young student and a young woman, especially your organization, because students play a very important role and women play an important role, and I think you represent both these categories very well. You have mentioned a very alarming trend, and that is marriage being used as a political tool. Because a very personal thing being used as a political tool can have very large ramification. So I would like to know your views more extensively, because as a young woman, how do you see this panning out, say a decade or two down the line? Because this can change the entire demography and the entire political scenario landscape of the Tibetan movement. So I would like your comments on that. Professor Lin, you have mentioned two very important things. One is public awareness, how about the abuses. My question to you is that many of us, especially in the world, the global community is already aware of the abuses that China causes to a lot of its minorities, and Tibet being one of the important ones. So you've got the Uyghur Muslims, you've got Tibetans. In fact, Taiwan and Hong Kong are being persecuted in their own way by China. So how do you see that despite this public awareness, the world seems to be silent when it comes to China? So, even the Wuhan virus, the world knew where it came from, the origins of it, but everyone was silent. So, how can stakeholders like Taiwan and India come together and play an important role in increasing this not only awareness, but also the pressure to act? Because that, I think, is missing. And very rightly, you've mentioned the role of exiled community. So I would like to know from you, how do you intend giving voice to that exiled community? Because the exiled community, no doubt, will be playing a very important role. But many a times, this exiled community doesn't have a voice. So how is it that we can provide this exiled community with a voice? Thank you. With that, I end. Yes, we can begin with Marco, sir. Would you
Yeah.
like to speak?
Yeah. Thank you for putting me that question, which is a very crisp question, and I will try to answer in a crisp way. Meaning that, of course, my comments are personal comments. They don't involve maybe my colleague, and they may sound not very politically correct, but I'm sure you will consider that as intellectual honesty on my behalf. If I correctly understand the angle of your question, I have no solution. But the first contribution that the world, and especially men, should do this topic, or could do, is to really understand what a treasure women are, and respect them for that. With stopping to pay lip service in International Day for women, for whatever, to women, and do it every other day. Better, do it daily. What I mean is that we live in a world, and this comes the incorrect part, and I don't want to offend anyone, but this is my idea, and I want to go directly. We live in a world where people pride themselves of not being able to define what a woman is. I can define what a woman is, and I want to define what a woman is, because a woman is a treasure, is a pearl, is a gift to humanity. I'm not stupid enough to say, as I said in my presentation, that women are only a generative aspect of life, that they are not only mothers, but if we don't start thinking them back, at least also um, thinking, I mean, considering them also in that capacity, we will always pay lip service to women and do nothing for them. I think that totalitarian states use this rhetoric and ideology to have a male approach to these kind of things, which means in this case a repressive approach. Again, this is another, and I'm concluding, this is another probably incorrect take on my behalf, but we just discussed today of family planning forced upon women. We live in a world where family planning is considered a human right. Fine. I have my opinion on that. I don't want to discuss that, but people need to understand that what is considered a right in some part of the world is an oppression in some others, like Tibet, Xinjiang, and China as a whole. And this is very bad. If we don't start thinking in a more correct way, saying that what is a right here may be an oppression in another place, women will not be respected at all. And this is not only the beginning of the problem, but it is also the end, because we don't escape from this circular understanding on things, and women will be always the victims.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. I think, yeah, marriage, for marriage, using it as a political tools, itself is very disturbing, right? And marriage itself is a very sacred and a very important occasion in one's life, right? Where we choose our someone to be your life partner, where we with whom you share your everything. And for me personally, I think if someone forced me to marry someone, um, I can't imagine that. And even uh, for the reason where it is planning to dilute, or like, planning to eliminate my identity, that's unimaginable, right? And then in Tibet, I'll say, see, traditionally the size of Tibetan population is controlled by the large portions of monks and nuns who took a vows of celibacy. And then uh, almost 1.2 million Tibetans died as a direct result of the 1949 PRC's occupations of Tibet. and and we say we have 6 million Tibetans only, right? And then with these numbers, now there's only like small populations of Tibetan who has been left behind, like, the civilians, right? And then in light of all this reality, it appears that the family planning policies and the forceful marriage in Tibet are intended to decrease the size of the population and change the fundamental structure of Tibetan society. And I think that is why it's really disturbing, and that I think that is why um, it need to be discussed more and it should be addressed more and more often. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the two questions. I think the first question is about um, when China speaks, everyone silenced because the power of the Chinese. And actually, if you look the international relations, actually, it's true. It is really a power game. So as a Taiwanese, we have a real experience how the Chinese operation, how the Chinese power on Taiwan for many years. So for the Taiwanese people, what we do is, the first thing is to make our democracy strong. As long as we have a democratic society, we can contrast to the Chinese government, those authoritarian regime. We enjoy all kinds of freedom. And also we have the economic development which the whole world cannot ignore. So that is what we have been doing. So each selection, what we say is just like go to a war, because that each vote is just like a bullet. It's really a war for us. So we take it, democracy, very seriously. And since the international relationship is a power game, of course, the democratic country should unite together to fight the Chinese ideology, because Chinese government want to rule the whole world using their way. Of course, we should never let these kind of things happen. So as a Taiwanese, what I want to say is we should unite together to fight for the democracy and our own freedom. So that's the only way we to do. And we have been doing for many years, and we will going to do in the future. Okay. And the second point about how to get the voice of the exile community, how to make the voice heard of the exile community. And from my part, as a scholar has been doing this kind of research for many years, I know there are very, very, very few scholars like me in Taiwan is doing this kind of research. What I can do is I will organize the workshops and the conference at least once a year to let the different people to know this kind of situation, to know the situation of Tibetan community. For me, as long as I'm doing, I'm sure that's better than nothing in the first. And the second, I believe many people will more aware about the situation after we have do this kind of activity. So I think since the past 2 years, we have doing this. So then I will keep on doing, and I'm organizing one workshop in Taiwan, maybe in mid-October, and it's still about the exile community of Tibetan in India. Yeah, so that's my answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Over
you
to
very
you.
much. Ayushi, now I think,
Over to you,
yes,
sir.
now
Yes.
thank you very much. And all the questions were very relevant, and your questions, your choice of questions made today's discussion very not only fruitful, but it could make bring the best of our speakers to give a gist of how they look at the whole issue. So thank you very much. So now it is time for our friend Sonam Tsering, who is General Secretary of Tibetan Youth Congress, a very prominent leader of the diaspora, and he is as co-host of this webinar and the whole series. So I will request Sonam Tseringla to please present his comments and vote of thanks. Sonam Tsering.
Thank you, Vijayji, for the kind introduction. As rightly presented by Pasan La, since from 1959, when the Tibet situation in Tibet became critical, and when the security of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama was threatened by the presence and pressure of the communist forces, the Tibetan women from all walks of life rose up against the Chinese forces and took to the street of Lhasa and defended the national sovereignty. And since then, Tibetan women took part in the Tibetan national freedom struggle, either by taking part in the protest event or by taking the responsibility of the whole load of the upbringing the children, especially when their husband and male members of the families were arrested and imprisoned by the communist forces with baseless allegations and accusations. And on top of that, I had the privilege of attending a public talk by the former political prisoners Ngawan Samdrola last week. And through her personal experience how the Chinese tortured them, treated them in the prisons were heart-wrenching and unimaginable. So with this opportunity, want to extend, I want to pay my utmost respect to the courageous and committed ones out there who are committed to the cause of Tibet. So without taking much time, I, on behalf of Chase and TYC, extend our sincere thanks to the guest speakers, Marco Respenti and Professor Merlin Penn and Tenzin Pasanla for firstly for accepting our invitation and then doing a detailed discussion on the today's topic. So thank you very much. And next, I want to thank Vijay the chairman of the Chase and the co-host of this webinar, for moderating today's webinar. And Vijay I always keep on saying this because we have many foreign friends who are more Tibetan than many Tibetans when it comes to pointing their finger against the Chinese repressive and oppressive policies. So thank you, Vijay. And next, I want to thank Professor Ayushi Katka for always handling the question and answer session and also for raising some of the important questions. And also thank you, Lotznela from Tibet Action Institute for handling the technical part without any barriers. And lastly, I want to thank the audiences who are joining virtually in our webinar. So thank you everyone, and thank you everyone for making this webinar possible and successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonam Seringji, for your vote of thanks. And now, before I conclude, I have very interesting information to share with you all and our audience that our next webinar is going to be a very special one. On 15th of August, India is going to celebrate its 75th anniversary of independence, which is going to be a very, very big show in India. And I'm sure the whole world is going to take note of it. And on the eve of this day, we are going to have a very relevant, a subject which is going to be very relevant for not only Tibetan people, but also all those colonies occupied by China. Our next webinar will be on 13th of August, Saturday, which will be the eve of India's 75th anniversary of independence. And the subject will be, will China's colonies celebrate Independence Day soon? So this is a question which we'll have a similar set of panelists who are going to speak, and one of them is a member of Parliament of the European Union, European Parliament, and some other prominent scholars who understand the subject. So I will request all of you to join us, and I'm sure we will have quite an exciting time in the next webinar like we had this time. And this webinar, I'm sure, was one of our such thought-provoking webinars in which we could get different perspectives and a very wider knowledge about the situation of Tibetan women under colonial control of China, the kind of suppression they are facing, and I'm sure it will help many of our audience to make their opinion on this issue and to make their own contribution in whatever way they can. So thank you very much, and namaste to all of you, and see you again very soon on 13th of August. Bye.